We're going to start off with the Gorkanaut and Morkanaut with some tactics. So, first of all, I'm going to cover everything here, guys, from the keyword to the basics, whether you're a new player, an intermediate player, or if you're considering taking them on the GT level. So, first off, let's start with the keywords. So we have Titanic, Towering, Walker, and of course, the Transport. I had to put the 12 in there because a lot of people keep forgetting that they are not Transport 6 anymore. They are Transport 12 now, which that is actually significant. We'll talk about that in a second. So we go detachments. I'm always going to advise strictly Dread Mob here and War Horde if you really want to integrate, let's say, a Gorkanaut into your list because you just feel like you have one, you want to put him in your list because you want damage 6. That's totally fine. He's just way better in Dread Mob. Both of these are the Gorkanaut and the Morkanaut. Of course, we have the basic mech. The basic mech is highly advised for both of these gets. We'll talk about that more, but we call them the mech tax around here, right? I call them the mech tax. If you're going to be taking our Titanic boys, just understand that a lot of the time you're going to be paying for the mech. As for do you want to bring a mech per Titanic Walker? Ooh, that's a little bit of contention here, boys, right? So let's say you're bringing a Stampa, Morkanaut, and a Gorkanaut, which is I've actually done this, brought them to RTT, that's fine. I only brought 2 mechs. That's because a lot of the time I felt that my one individual mech would be able to assist with giving +1 to who's ever going out first. And then he would kind of stick around and tag along to the second guy. One would babysit the Stampa. So all in all, as these guys die, sometimes your third mech kind of dwindles in the air and doesn't have something to do. So I sometimes bring a second one. Can you bring just 3, one for every single Titanic Walker you use? Yes, because he is great value. How is he great value? Because the +1 is very obvious, right? What you really need to consider as an orc player is your Titanic Walker might not get one shot. Now, a lot of you guys are going, he always gets one shot. Well, I understand there are times he can get one shot. Yeah, there's some times where you just kind of early expose him. He doesn't really get killed right away. Maybe he's in a lane where only a few guns can target him. Here's when the mech comes into play. Because he's a transport, the mech can jump out, give him the +1 after he's already moved. Therefore, if he gets bracketed, mech can have help offset that if he's already been bracketed from losing too much damage. So sure, you can't heal him all the way past the bracketing range, but +1 does offset it because both of these guys have innate +1 to hit on the wall. One's for shooting, one's for melee, of course. Then, of course, we're going to talk about the strategy, strategic reserve, right? A lot of the time, orc players as a whole do not utilize strategic reserves. You guys do not utilize rapid ingress target. I know you don't. I know you don't. It's very common that orc players simply don't use strategic reserves when it's on the battlefield. And if they do, they just let stuff naturally come in. They don't play the extra CP for an ingress. Gorkanauts, Morkanauts, mostly just Gorkanauts here, are really good strategic ingress targets, right, guys? A lot of the time, because you brought them in on a battlefield edge, only a couple enemy guns can actually line up on them and end up trying to shoot them in retaliation if they have to take oncoming fire. And it helps them cover the distance to get up the field earlier, right? A lot of people understand that your orc list is already going to be creating space going forward. You should keep that in mind that you're looking to create space for your Gorkanaut if he's going to choose to come from strategic reserves. Let's talk about a little bit of the distinctions here, right? And I will go back to the transport talk because that is important to me. Shout out to our sponsors, the Baron of Dice, as they helped us do our Waaaghtaktiks dice. So shout them out. Check them out in the description, 5% off in the discount because nobody likes taxes. And shout out to Baron of Dice. They allow us to do our paint competition. So thank you very much to them. So we have the Mork. Now, the best part of the Morkanaut is simply his 5-up invuln. Yes, that's really just the best part about him. You're paying extra for that 5-up invuln and for his potential on his ranged offense. Now, his firepower is a bit underwhelming, actually. He sits at about strength 10 with his main arm cannon and then strength 9 with his custom mega blasters that are on his body. He doesn't really have great volume. Therefore, his firepower is underwhelming, but that doesn't mean the enemy doesn't respect it, right? The fact that you can simply tell your opponent, hey, this is what he can do. He can hit on 4s. He can re-roll the entire hit roll. He can get +1 to wound, +1 damage from big shells for bigger gets. The enemy just simply has to respect that, right? It's not that they won't always respect it, but they have to understand that you can do this, and it might make them behave a little differently. Not to mention that he can still punch. He can still grump. He's still flat damage 6 on his punching. He still has a moderately respectful sweep attack. All right. typically whenever he's doing press the button, he's already kind of hazardous. So if you're going to roll for him, it's because you're scared that he's going to roll more hazardous. I understand that for ones and twos, but if you're going to just go in and you're actually hoping to do damage for him, I pretty much always choose sustain. I know he can get additional AP when you roll sixes to wound, but the volume he has is simply too low for me to advise that. And the strength, 10. Yeah, I understand you're going to want to use lethal, but a lot of the time, if you're actually shooting at something that you're trying to pop with him, you're going to use CP in other ways as well. So lethal kind of offsets his low volume and kind of helps you to actually deal with his low AP as well. So overall, yes, he doesn't shoot that well. He's more of what I call him out the distraction. He's more of a distraction kind of effect, more about the first wave, right? If you're running multiple Titanic walkers or just a stompy big list and all in all, because you have, let's say, dreads, cans, other units we're going to talk about on this list, things inside of a dread mob detachment, your Morkanaut actually is going first. You would think he doesn't because he's the shooting one, but that actually kind of works because guys are still kind of far away for him to actually interact with if he was just simply trying to punch them. In Dread Mob, he does have the ability to advance and shoot. Therefore, you can take advantage of that, throw him up the table to get him on OC. He does have the 5-up info, so he can actually bait out an investment from your enemy. And that's really the best case that I've really thought about bringing him. Now, is he expensive for, bait? Yes, but he does require a heavy investment from your enemy. In this case, you can actually draw out things that are valuable. If you're playing against World Eaters, maybe they'll throw Angren at you. Maybe they'll throw on a big brick of Exalted 8-bound at you. Now you can start getting some active trades of problematic units and the terms that you want because you wanted to put Mork there. You were okay with him dying. If you're using your Sampa and you can actually lay down retaliatory fire down the field, you can actually get people to expose those lancers and stuff like that too for your Mork. So Mork's more of your waste. He's not horrible, but for theme purposes, I have brought him. He does work, just far shadowed by the Gorkanaut. So the Gorkanaut is really what you really want to bring if you're bringing a Titanic Walker. Right, we talked about the transport capability here. Both of these guys, before I move on to the Gork, I want to mention that you can take advantage of their transport capability. Now, if you're going to deploy these guys on the line, I'm going to be showing you guys layouts, some of the terrain layouts and the GW deployments, and then I'm going to try to kind of guide you through where I would advise putting these without all the context of, let's say, a mission, a list, or an opponent, but just simply where I look at these guys and I want to hide them. One thing to consider is if you're playing these guys and you're just simply putting them on the line because threat saturation, you're not really scared about the enemy, understand that their transport capability becomes useful because you can simply stick something like Storm Boys inside of them, right? I know that the Orc player, I'm just having a brain fart, Joshua Cowell was just one with Orcs. He was saying, hey, I bring my Orcs and I put them on this table. I don't end up putting all my Storm Boys on the table. Something I've been advising to you guys. In this case, you put those Storm Boys inside the Gorkanaut and the Morkanaut because they will disembark. They will now be deployed around the line, disembark 3, and then move through 12, and then possibly advance and charge into something. Not that you always want to, but there are targets early games for them to punch out. All in all, the fact that they can stand right on the line, disembark 3, and then moves means your Storm Boys move quickly up the field to do secondaries, to stage up, to pull in more reserves. Let's say your other Gorkanauts coming up the field. You need something there to deny the enemy from pulling that space from 9 inches, right? So a lot of the time I like to throw my Storm Boys all the way forward. Or you can just simply put flash kits. You can put 5-man units of flash kits in these Gorkanauts, Morkanauts. Once they get blown up, once they end up, let's say, going to the middle, they play their flank, whatever it may do, the flash kits can get out. Maybe they're staged up behind terrain and they understand that the enemy wants to blow them up. Well, flash kits get out, they move through the terrain and they start shooting and interacting with the game, and you're not wasting that transport capability or his big staging location because units can actually sit inside of him and stage alongside with him. You can put Ludas in there with him because the 12 capability means anything you're going to really think about doing with the truck, you could do with him, besides the fact that he's not dedicated transport. Works for both of these guys, right? A lot of the time, the transport capability is simply slept on these guys. I advise you do not sleep on it. It is really good for just helping maintain momentum and pressure. Now, with the Gorkanaut, yes, he gets +1 to hit in melee during the wall. Like I said, alongside the mech, that helps offset if he becomes bracketed. So he can still hit on 2s once he's actually been in a prolonged fight. Another thing is his range is actually very impressive, right? Everybody knows that if you're an Orc player, volume is key, right? We understand that quality is important for some armies. They're going for high damage, high AP, whatever it may be. For Orcs, quantity is our quality. So whenever you look at a unit, a data sheet, and you go, wow, this actually has high volume, understand that that can be exploited for us a lot of the time, and we want to exploit that. That being said, the Deathstorm Cannon on your Gorkanaut becomes a very versatile tool. If you're going into a high toughness unit and you choose lethal, you can end up putting a bunch of wounds on this guy just from choosing lethal without actually pulling rerolls, right? Let's say you don't even want to use the rerolls for big shells for bigger gets and rerolls to hit. You could use that as well, but let's say you don't even want to. The fact that he can choose to use volume of fire of lethals makes a difference. The fact that it's sustained means he can just chew away a bunch of T3 infantry because of strength 6, ends up clearing chaff. His rocket can go off and it feels pretty nice. But his shooting always ends up catching the enemy off guard, and you always end up chewing off more wounds that they expect. One thing is he really does have the most value from the mech, like I said before. So if I am taking a mech, the mech is really always trying to get along and be alongside of him. He is cheap for 265 points. The Mork isn't where he's at, where I want him to be, but he can be. But the Mork Gork is where I want him to be for 265 points. As for the button, he actually appreciates all terms of the button, meaning I don't really care to always force it. Sometimes you don't want your model to lose wounds. Sometimes you don't feel like forcing the button. You simply want to roll for it. In his case, because he has a volume of firepower and his melee is respectable in volume as well, meaning when he just simply goes for the button, sometimes it ends up working in his favor without you caring. A lot of the time, this works more for melee. If you're going to just punch, I do suspect you just choose what you want to pick, which a lot of times is sustain because you're just rolling one dice for it. But for his shooting potential, just sometimes letting it roll and shooting all of his guns can feel really good. Even getting additional AP sometimes can end up really making the difference in chipping up away enemies. Another thing I want people to not forget about if you're an orc player is if someone is trying to screen one of these guys, understand that you can tank shock to push these models out of your way, right? You tank shock, you blow up a couple of them away with your rolling them over with your high toughness, and then you pile in into combat. So don't allow screens to just simply get in your way with these boogie boys either. Understand that they can tank shock and they have the firepower to shoot. So it's harder to actually make a screen for the Gorkanaut than people will anticipate because his volume of fire, and he can run in there and end up charging as well. And yeah, of course, you can always miss when you roll the button, but that's why sometimes you don't really care. Now, here's a little example I want to give as to here's GW layout 1 on tipping point. If I had a Titanic Gorkanaut / Morkanaut, we're just going to write it out here with a little drawing piece. We're going to just say this is, I believe I had this for take and hold when we're starting here. So a person will be asking, hey, Eddie, what would I want to do here? I don't have the list for everything, so we're just going to simply try to do this quick. In layout 1, this is actually favorable to melee armies. Let's say you're an orc player and you understand that gas. I went too far ahead, guys. I'm trying to use my poker. I got a poker here. Okay, guys, make sure I can get this poker going. You guys see it? Yes, you can. Okay, a lot of the time, my green little circle here, this is where you're going to put your killie, your brake, your gas. Maybe it's a truck, whatever that you're really scared to go with. Where are you going to put your Gorkanaut / Morkanaut? Now, this is actually a favorable position for your Gorkanaut Morkanaut to stage up, as he can simply go into the middle and sit here for the majority of the time when you're staging in the game. Now, can an enemy come down the northern lane and take a lane on him and end up shooting him? Yes, but if one enemy can really shoot him in an activation with one model, you have other problems there, and it was going to happen anyways. We don't place game plans off exceptions, right? You can also have to worry about this lane of fire if he can end up shooting shot through here. So just understand that you are advancing to stage into this middle piece of terrain. Well, why this middle piece of terrain? Well, these blue pieces allow you to, 1, actually step over that, but be actually hidden from shooting. And 2, this allows you to take advantage of what we spoke about earlier. If you fit the Gorkanaut here, you can actually take advantage of your flash gets getting out and filling this terrain piece, whether it's maybe some grots filling that terrain piece. And they can actually sit here and end up interacting with stuff that's on the terrain, stuff that's trying to sit on the outside of this terrain piece and actually not interact with you or stage up into you. And you can end up making a wall here if you simply get grots out and the enemy decides they're going to run into you, right? Say the enemy is actually sitting near their natural expansion over here in this corner, and they want to move towards you. If you have grots that have simply disembarked and they're in this terrain already, they can reactive move and make a line right outside this terrain. So now your enemy's out in the open, right? Now, let's say that you already have stuff that's dedicated to you wanting to stage up in this middle. You're playing with Gaz. Maybe you want to take Zagra and you want to throw him up in here because you have Zod on your list and there's no other good staging locations for Zod. That's where then again you can still use this for strategic reserve. Well, why is that? Well, how many of actual lanes of fire are coming in on this side of the table if you take here or if you end up coming in here? Now you can still move over a blue. I would say the southern location is actually worse for you because the line of fire from the enemy's deployment usually already has something down this main line, right? So when you're coming in from strategic reserves, you're going to be looking for this northern part, and you're going to be staging in the middle with something like a Zagra or a killing potential unit. Why does that matter? Well, it means the enemy does not want to stage up here to simply allow you to stop your reserves, because then you can leapfrog from here to here and then pile in and end up tagging this objective in some kind of ways with, of course, orc maneuvering and such like that, right? So if you are playing on this deployment, whether you are deciding I'm going to stage in the middle and use my Gork as a big melee pressure disembarking transport staging piece, you can use that here. Or if you're coming in from reserve, understand that this simple staging piece from the middle should be allowing you to stop and threaten the enemy from blocking out your reserves. Also, a simple snick rot. When people ask a lot of time what I do with snick rot, a snick rot can go here or it can simply go up here. Of course, this is more threatening because you're closer to the enemy deployment zone, so don't be a bonehead. But a snick rot can simply go here because he does have lone op and he won't get shot from this very big, obvious line of fire. Just know that if you do end up trying to use this for coming in from a strategic reserve location, there's a huge line of fire here, right? So that's one place I would like. One little layout that I would like to discuss as to what I would do with a Morkanaut / Gorkanaut if I was to play on Tipping Point GW Layout 1, for anybody who's a little bit newer wanting to see a visual example of what you would do there. If you enjoyed the clip, check out the full video here. If you'd like to see more tactics, click here.
Let's get stuck in, lads!